lecture series in computer science on principles of deep learning. In today's session, I am going to focus on neuron and its types. Moving on to the session details, today we are going to know about the definition of a neuron, the working steps, example illustration and the types of neural networks. Before we move on to the basics of a neuron, in previous class we have discussed the definition of deep learning, the various applications, the tools that are available in the market to build a deep learning model. So, moving on to the concept of deep learning model, we should know first the basic definition called neuron. These neurons, they mimic the neurons in the human brain, means the neuron in deep learning were inspired by the neurons in the human brain. So, here we see the picture of a human brain where our human brain works in a model or in a structure called the neural networks or the neurons with the help of the neurons. Now, we see the basic picture of how a neural networks will be. Here in this diagram, neurons in deep learning models, they are the nodes through which the data and the computations flow. Here we have to understand a little bit about the diagram, where the diagram consists of 4 green lines there called the input parameters. Then there are some layers, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. These 3 layers we call it as a hidden layer. Moving on to the last structure, there are 2 outbound arrow marks, green signals with arrow marks called the outputs. So, if we consider the neural networks, these models consist of a node which was depicted in orange color, we call it as a neuron. These neurons, they process the information, either it can be a data or a computation flow. So, here when you see the neural networks, it is like the brain of AI, and here these are designed to learn, solve the problems just like as we human beings do. Now, moving on to a biological part of neuron, what it is, how our human brain works. See the block diagram. In our human brain consists of mainly 3 parts called the cell body or the cell, and inside the cell there is a concept called the nucleus. There are 2 more things which helps in the transmission or communication within the brain. One is called the dendrite, other one is called the axon. Here axons are the long trails where they will transmit the messages from a cell, and here the dendrites, like a tree branches, they helps to receive the messages from the cell. So, if you see the biological part of a human brain, there is a nucleus in the cell body which controls the functioning of the cell, and there is a long tail like structure called axon which helps to transmit the messages, and a tree branch type structure called the dendrite which helps to receive the messages. So, after just understanding how a human brain will be, how the cell, nucleus, what is the role of dendrites and axon, the same has been mimicked or it has been implemented as part of the deep learning model called the neural network. So, here how this neural network is inspired by the biology is, here we call the neural networks as the artificial neural networks, ANN, and these ANNs are inspired by the biological neurons in the human brain. Here we called each neuron is a mathematical function that closely simulates the functioning of a biological neuron. Here these neurons activate under specific conditions to trigger the actions in the body. Similarly, the artificial neural networks in the ANN also does the same way, they activate on the input data. Here we have to understand what it is, why it has been mimicked as a human brain structure. So, we have to understand that when we visually see an object, we will just think whether the object belongs to which type. If we see the animals, we categorize them as animals. If you see any object, we categorize it as an object. If you see any plant structure, we categorize as a plant structure. So, how our brain is just thinking over the picture and treating that picture similar to an object that is already stored in the human brain. It compares the image and it categorizes that particular image. Similarly, the deep learning model where we make the computer to just analyze an object, think futuristically how human behavior is being designed, in the same way we are making the system to think in the same lines. Now, here the concept is ANN, that is artificial neural networks. They also think of an activation function and they activate the things based on the input data. So, moving on, how the structure of this ANN will be. ANN, they consist of layers of interconnected artificial neurons. This is very, very important, because when we see a particular object and we want to categorize it to a particular thing, we need to think that that will not happen in one single step. We need to supply the input features and it has to go long within the layers by layers. It has to convert the given input into the features of that particular object, and at last it has to produce the output. So, here we say that artificial neural networks consist of layers of interconnected neurons. Now, here these neurons will be organized into layers and each layer will be performing a computation using the activation functions, and it will decide which signals to pass to the next layer. So, from the input to the output, there will be a series of computations taking place where some functions will be activated upon that to get the desired output. Moving on, how this training process works, how this entire from input to output goes on, we need to understand that during training, ANNs adjust the input parameters, these are known as weights. Here, some of the buzzwords we come across these artificial neural networks are the weights, bias, and you got the layers. Okay. So, these weights are initially, they are taken as randomly, and these weights are optimized through a process called backpropagation methodology, whereby the network learns how to minimize the difference between the actual and the predicted output. So, here we just come across certain things called, here we understand, we take a particular object and we see to that whatever the object we are seeing belongs to that object or not. Suppose if you see visually, you want to know whether a cat is being categorized to cat or not. So, how to do this? We just have some 10,000 pictures of cat, and whenever a new picture of cat is being loaded, the new picture will be compared with the already existing 10,000 pictures of the cat in the database, and we see the feature mapping. So, if the mapping works out to some accuracy level, say 90% or 95%, we conclude that the given object is also a cat or the given image is also a cat. So, this process how it has been done is through the layers, input, the hidden layers which process the features one onto the other, and the final output layer. There comes here we say the initial values. So, for each of the features we provide some initial weights, and these weights have been again calculated through some of the optimization techniques called the backpropagation methods. Here we come across several different algorithms within these phases, and after all these phases is being done, what we are making the network is to minimize the error. Error here is what is the difference between the predicted one and the actual output. So, moving on, what is the actual function of this neuron biologically? We understand that dendrite, axon and synapses are the three major functions or the components that are there in the human brain. So, when we see a dendrite, we know that they receive the signals, and we know that axon is passing the signals through these, whatever the information has been communicated towards the cells is being passed through this axon, and here synapses is the dendrites of one neuron connected to the axon of the other one. So, these are the basic functionality that helps a neuron to work. Now, moving on to the neural network, what are the components of it? We understand that there are layers, there are weights being given as an initial value, bias is there, and apart from that activation functions are there within this neural network architectural concepts. So, we understand that weights are the initial values that are supported or supplied to the input parameters, and here activation functions, they decide which neuron to be activated or which neuron to be make it live, such that you will introduce the non-linearity, which is a crucial one for all these complex mappings. So, we deeply discuss the different types of activation functions in the next coming module. Now, we just understand the difference between linear and non-linearity. We know that a linear function is a straight line, and with the given input values, the linear just makes through to certain points through a straight line. And here non-linearity is very important when you are considered or when you are working with an image objects. So, here the activation function is a non-linear function first of all, and this non-linear function is being applied by a neuron to introduce the non-linear properties in the network. So, it has to go through all the given cells or the mappings, and a clear picture of the object identification or feature mapping is being found. Moving on to the importance of neural networks. In today's world now, we know that in previous session we came to know that artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning are one among the other is the subset of all. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning is a subset of the artificial intelligence. Here we understand why a neural network is necessary, because for some applications, whenever we are working with a computer vision or an object related thing or a speech related process or application or a natural language processing, we say that the machine learning models are not compatible for that. So, we require some more processing, complex processing through the neural network architecture. So, when we see the importance of neural networks, they are mainly used for computer vision, natural language processing and speech patterns or speech recognition, voice assistance systems. Now, moving on to its importance, these neural networks, they learn and model the complex relationships. This is the first important objective or the importance of a neural network. Now, here improve the decision making process, because in each of every step from input to output, it has undergone a series of hidden layers whereby forward propagation and backward propagation is done in a neural network concept. So, it makes to improve the decision making process. And the third importance is the classify and cluster the data. So, here in neural networks, it comes under different types of learnings are available within a few slides. There is a learning called supervised learning and supervised learning. So, here non-linearity is being introduced, and this deep learning models mainly they classify and they cluster the data. They just say whether a cat belongs to whatever the image that is uploaded newly belong to a cat category or a dog category or a core object like that. So, depending upon it extracts the features of the given image and compares the features with the existing images that are already been uploaded, and if there is a similarity index of more, we say we are either classifying an object or we are segregating an object called the clustering of data. So, another one important advantage of neural network is they can analyze the large data sets. So, however might be the rows and columns in a data set. So, these deep learning models, they apply the computational power is high and they process the or analyze the large data sets. And moving on to the last important application, or what for the neural networks are meant is to solve the complex problems. So, these are the 5 different aspects of neural networks where the importance is gained. Now, moving on to the exact functionality of neural network. See here, in the given diagram, we say that there are different input independent variables. Here you see x1, x2, x3. These are the input parameters we are assuming. Suppose you consider you want to find out any pattern in any healthcare thing. Suppose any particular disease type you want to analyze, whether that particular disease is a positive one or a negative one for a given data. Suppose we are assuming that we want to predict a heart disease data set. So, here several parameters will be given, what contributes to the heart disease, those input parameters will be taken. So, you can consider those input variables as x1, x2, x3. For any heart disease, we measure the blood pressure, okay, and we can see the sugar levels. Like this, there might be several different parameters for taking a or for considering the hard data set. So, those parameters will be given as variable 1, 2, 3, x1, x2, x3. So, these input parameters, they have been placed at some weightage, because each parameter will not contribute to the actual output. So, how much we have to take for each of the input, we have to guess W1, W2 and W3 and so on, and these have been provided to a next level of neurons. Neurons here is one cell. Okay. So, these neurons, they process, they activate and then move on the output to the next succeeding levels, and here at the end you got the output dependent variable. So, this is how the functionality of the neuron goes. So, the input layers, the parameters have been taken, and from the input layers, applying different functions and calculated values or weightage, you will be moving on to the next layers. Those are called the hidden layers. Depending upon the problem, the hidden layers may grow or the hidden layers may shrink. And then from those hidden layers, by applying forward propagation, backward propagation, the output is generated. We can see very well in the next diagram here what actually the mathematical computation is being involved in this. See here in this diagram, x1, x2 and so on, x7 are the input parameters, w1, w2, w3 are the weightage given to the input parameters, and we are moving into a concept called the sigma, where you are computing something, and sigma xi and wj. Xj, Wj, where j is from 1 to n. You are going to summate this values, and depending upon the particular value what you got, it will be processed or move on to the hidden layers. And under the hidden layers, you will be having activation functions, and these activation functions, they are like the catalyst which helps to think which input attribute is of more priority. And now, after moving or applying these activation functions, you will get the desired output. Moving on to the actually how mathematically it can be conceptualized. Here you see the input variables x1, x2, x3 and so on xn have been given weightage w1, w2 and so on wn, and you have applied some computation sigma xi and wi with some bias. And then these have been used with different functions called activation functions. These activation functions help to find out the error, and after we got a certain percentage of error, we would like to minimize the error. So, they are again back propagated to the network. Now, you think that if the value is of certain range, you will say it is a positive one. If the value is out of some range, you will say it does not belong to that future model. So, these type of declarations in output, either positive or negative or 1 or 0, is being completely constructed by a simple neural network by Frank Rosenblatt in the year 1958. Now, moving on to the one more example illustration of how this can be any neural network can be visualized. Suppose you consider your input parameters are, you are taking as an area, some bedrooms, how many bedrooms you have, and how much is the distance to the city, and then the age. Depending upon these factors, you can think that using the neural network concept, whether the pricing of the building, whether you can predict the pricing of that particular building. This example we have taken. So, 4 parameters have been taken. These 4 parameters will be given weightage, and depending upon the weightage, whichever thing is high, suppose you see that bedrooms are the counts of 2 BHK or 3 BHK like that, or the distance from the city is so much distance or the distance is less, and age, how much is the age to have the pricing of that apartment, okay, and then area in feet you can think. So, if you supply these and you apply some mathematical functions, you can guess the pricing of that. So, this is one example illustration of neural network. Now, one more application we can see called the email classification. We already know that in every day in our inbox, so many junk mails or spam mails have been introduced in the network. So, by applying this neural network concept, how this artificial intelligence can be given to the system, mailing system, such that when any mail is being categorized as a spam, it goes automatically to the spam folder. So, how this can be thought in process of a neural network architecture? So, the given input layer take the features of the mail like the content, the sender information and the subject. So, these are the three information that are supplied as an input. So, by the content what you can decide whether it is a some malicious content is there now, we can categorize as a spam mail, or the sender information. If that particular email ID is not an appropriate email ID, we feel that after giving some 10,000 databases etc., we can say that these are the fellows who always send mails as a spam, no? And then we can say that that particular sender we can be categorized as a spam mail. And then the subject, whatever the subject we are writing in the subject line also contributes something to the output. These are the three input parameters we can take, and now these inputs has to be adjusted with the weights, and it has been passed to the hidden layers. Weights here is the word dictionary, which are the words which contributes more towards the spam. So, that weightage we have to give to the both the content, sender as well as the subject line. Now, moving on to the network, you have to undergo a rigorous training now. You have to make the system to understand or learn to recognize the patterns which indicates whether an email is spam or not. You should maintain a dictionary further, and the output layer is only the binary value either 1 or 0, whether the given mail, the input mail that is freshly generated is a spam mail or a normal regular mail. Okay. So, now here we think that the network iteratively refines its weights. So, whatever the values that are there in that mail contains, each and every time that particular input value will be given weightage, and it undergoes a series of process and it calculates, and it has to go through the back propagation methodology to just say that distinguish between the spam and legitimate emails. And in this process is a practical real world application called the email filtering application. So, these are the two applications which we discuss as part of the neural network architecture. Now, moving on to the how it is working, how a neural network works. First, there is a forward propagation methodology and then backward propagation methodology. In forward propagation, we just follow 4 steps. Step 1, have the input layer, take the features first, and each feature in the input layer is a node and it represents the input data. Now, moving on to the second step, associated with each input you have to provide some weightage, and these weightage interconnections will be there. The weight of each neuron connection indicates how strongly that particular input is associated with the output. Okay. And throughout the training, these weights will be always be changing. We will supply, first we will say the bondage is 0.5, later on we will change the bondage to 0.7, or at sometimes we will say the bondage to 0.1 also. So, like this, associated with each of the input parameter we need to put a weight. And moving on to the third step is the hidden layers. Here we understand that depending upon the problem, the hidden layers will be large or it might be small. So, from input to process output, how many our parameters you are considering in the neural networks, you need to design the hidden layer. Here inside the hidden layer, each hidden layer neuron processes the inputs by multiplying them with the weights, adding them and then passing through the other layers through activation function. Here we have to understand that some non-linearity is also introduced to the network, and this helps to actually recognize the actual pattern. Now, at last we get the final result as an output. Here this process is being repeated until you get the desired output. Now, moving on to the from forward, there is something called the backward propagation, and under this backward propagation there is again a series of steps. You need to follow these steps such that until the desired output is reached. Now, inside the back propagation method, you need to first calculate the loss from input to process output. At one step, after one forward propagation is over, we calculate the loss. Loss is the actual difference between the real and the computational one. Now, the network's output is evaluated first against the real value and the loss is computed, and usually it is of the mean squared error, and there are several different methodologies to calculate the loss, which we will see in the next subsequent classes. Now, we need to just go through a phase called the gradient descendant algorithm we have to apply, and we have to, this methodology is being applied to lower the inaccuracy. So, what we have to do is weights are changed and based on the loss with respect to each weight. So, each of the weights again has to be reconsidered such that we will minimize the loss, and this methodology we call it as a gradient descendant. Now, moving on to adjusting weight, we found that loss is there. So, we are applying weights to the input values. So, the weights are readjusted and each connection, and it is an iterative process or it is a backward propagation across the networks to redo the work. Then again the training is given to the network, whereby different samples of data is being taken right from the entire process of forward propagation, loss calculation, then back propagation. Iteratively this training is being done, and this will helps the network to adapt and to learn to the new patterns from the data. At last, there are a important concept called the activation function, and these activation function, they introduce the non-linearity into the network, and by this the decision is whether to fire a neuron or not is based on this whole weighted input. And here many different activation functions are available. So, depending upon the problem, we just apply the activation functions. Now, moving on to the types of neural networks. There are several different of neural networks that are available in them depending upon the problem. So, a few are, first one is the perceptron, feed forward neural network, multi-layer perception, convolutional neural network, radial basis functional neural network, recurrent neural networks, LSTM long short term memory, sequence to sequence models, modular neural network. So, these are the different types of neural networks, where each network is as a separate architectural way of handling to solve the real world problems. Depending upon the problem, we use these neural networks. And when we see these 9 types of neural networks, mainly depends upon these 4 parameters or the factors. We can say when we take a particular structure of a problem, we can contribute this, for these types only this network architecture is suitable, or the factors are like the layers, how much depth we go to solve a problem, that also considered as a activation filter. Then neurons, how many neurons we use also depends upon the architecture and their density, and last one is the data flow. So, these are the 4 factors that decide the type of the neural network architecture. Now, moving on to the learning methods in neural networks, there are actually 3 kinds of learning methods: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. When we see the basic difference, supervised gives the meaning that it is under some control. So, here it is like learning with a teacher, whereby we have the required input training and a set of input and output. Here the output from the model is compared with the desired output, and if it is some error is calculated, again it is back propagated through the network, we will adjust the weights. So, the entire process of supervised learning is getting a feedback from the environment to the model. Moving on to the next method called the unsupervised learning method. Here there is no supervisor. So, there is no teacher available for us. So, what we have to do is there is no feedback from the environment. So, here in this method there is no desired output. So, the model learns on its own, that is the tag or mantra of unsupervised learning. Here during the training phase, the inputs that are formed into classes that define the similarity between the members. So, it will collect how much this particular thing is similar to the members within the family. So, it is the unsupervised method. And moving on to the last method, reinforcement learning. Here in this method, it is like a learning with a critic. So, with the critical information, you will just have the feedback as a critic, and here the critic tells how well we are close to the solution. So, here the model learns on its own based on the critic information. So, these are the 3 learning models in the neural networks which we can deeply study in the coming sessions. Now, to conclude the today's session, today we understand that what actually a neuron is, how it mimics the human brain, and what are the different components that make up the neuron and how it is important in real world, what component performs which type of action, and the working model and the different types of neurons. And the questions that can sum up from today's session is, what is neuron, what are its components or mention its components, how neurons work in deep learning, how does the back propagation work, and what is the role of an activation function, and list the various types of the neural networks that are available in market today. And these are the references that are being collected for today's session. Thank you.